You know that feeling, don't you? That peculiar heaviness that settles in your chest when you suddenly see through something everyone else believes in completely. Not the sharp pain of loss, but something far more subtle and persistent. It's the strange melancholy of the person who has looked behind the curtain and discovered that the wizard was just an ordinary man all along. But here's what nobody tells you about seeing clearly. Sometimes the most devastating thing isn't what you discover about the world, it's what you discover about yourself in the process of seeing. This is about that exquisite sadness, that beautiful burden of perception that changes everything and can never be unchanged. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share might just transform the way you understand your own melancholy forever. There's something rather cruel about the universe's sense of humor, isn't there? You spend years, perhaps decades, seeking truth, wisdom, understanding. You meditate, you read, you contemplate, you search with such earnest dedication. And then one day, like a gift you never asked for, clarity arrives. But nobody warns you about the price. I remember the first time I truly saw through the elaborate game we call normal life. It wasn't a mystical experience or a blinding flash of enlightenment. It was more like putting on glasses for the first time and realizing that what you thought was a beautiful impressionist painting was actually just blurred vision. The world became sharper, yes, but also somehow less comfortable. You see, when you begin to perceive the intricate web of illusions that most people live within quite happily, you face a peculiar dilemma. You can't unknow what you now know. You can't unsee what has been revealed. It's rather like being the only sober person at a party where everyone else is gloriously, blissfully drunk. And here's the fascinating paradox. The clearer your perception becomes, the more isolated you feel from the very people you understand better than ever before. You see their patterns, their unconscious motivations, their beautiful and tragic attempts to avoid suffering. You see the elaborate structures they've built to protect themselves from the very truth you can no longer avoid. Let me tell you about a particular kind of solitude that has nothing to do with being alone. You can be surrounded by people, engaged in the most intimate conversations, sharing meals and laughter and even love, and yet feel completely, utterly isolated. Not because you don't care about these people, quite the opposite, but because you've awakened to something they're still dreaming through. It's like being the only person in the theater who realizes you're watching a movie while everyone else is convinced they're looking through a window. The loneliness isn't bitter. That's what makes it so peculiar. It's more like the melancholy of a parent watching their child play an elaborate game of make-believe. You love them dearly, you appreciate the creativity and innocence of their play, but you can't quite enter their world anymore. You've forgotten how to believe in the game, and so you find yourself in this strange position, speaking two languages simultaneously. There's the language everyone understands, the words about careers and achievements, worries and plans, the endless commentary on the movie of life. And then there's this other language, the one that speaks to what you've actually seen, which most people aren't quite ready to hear. I've learned that you can't simply announce to people that their fundamental assumptions about reality are questionable. They'll think you're either mad or pretentious. And honestly, both responses are perfectly understandable. So you learn to love from a distance, to participate while knowing you're participating, to play the game while being fully aware it's a game. But oh, the loneliness of that awareness. It's not the sharp pain of rejection or abandonment. It's more like being homesick for a place that doesn't exist anymore, or perhaps never existed at all. There's a bittersweet ache that comes with remembering who you used to be before you knew what you now know. Do you recall that version of yourself who could get completely absorbed in things that now seem, well, rather quaint? The person who could worry genuinely about status, who could feel real urgency about deadlines, who could believe wholeheartedly that this promotion or that relationship would finally make everything right. I find myself nostalgic for my own former innocence sometimes, not because those concerns were more important than I now realize, but because the capacity to be completely convinced by them was, in its own way, a kind of grace. There's something beautifully human about being able to invest yourself fully in what you later discover to be provisional arrangements, to care deeply about things that, from a wider perspective, are rather like children's games played with enormous seriousness. But here's what's particularly poignant. You can't choose to believe again. You can't will yourself back into that state of unconscious participation. It's like trying to be surprised by your own surprise party. The very attempt defeats itself. Sometimes I watch people getting genuinely upset about things I can see are temporary, fixable, or ultimately unimportant, and I feel this tender envy. Not because I want their problems, but because I miss the simplicity of believing that solving the problem would solve everything. There's a purity to that kind of focus that awareness tends to complicate. And yet, would you really go back? Would you trade what you've seen for the comfort of not seeing it? It's a question that haunts those of us who have tasted a larger perspective. We are homesick for a country we've outgrown, nostalgic for a dream we've awakened from. This nostalgia isn't weakness, it's the heart's natural response to recognizing its own evolution. Now we come to perhaps the most delicate part of this whole affair. What do you do with your love for people who are living in what you can clearly see are dreams? Not nightmares, mind you. Often quite beautiful dreams filled with hope and meaning and genuine joy, but dreams nonetheless. I think of a friend who spent years building what he called his perfect life. Beautiful home, successful career, lovely family, all the markers of achievement our society holds dear. And he was genuinely happy in this construction, genuinely proud, genuinely fulfilled. But I could see, and this is the burden I'm speaking of, I could see the fragility of it all. Not because I was pessimistic or cynical, but because I'd learned to recognize the temporary nature of all constructions, no matter how solid they appear. So what do you do with this vision? Do you say to your friend, I'm delighted for your happiness, but you should know that everything you've built your identity around is essentially provisional? Of course not. That would be both cruel and pointless. But neither can you participate fully in his excitement about things you know are ephemeral. You find yourself in this odd position of being genuinely happy for someone's joy, while simultaneously aware of its conditional nature. It's like watching a child build an elaborate sandcastle. You don't tell them the tide is coming, because that would destroy their present delight for no good reason. But you also can't quite share their assumption that the castle is permanent. The real heartbreak isn't seeing through the illusion. It's loving people so much that you want to protect both their dreams and their eventual awakening from those dreams. You become a kind of guardian of their process, honoring where they are while holding space for where they're going. This is perhaps the most sophisticated form of love, to care for someone's journey without needing to control its pace. Here's where it gets truly fascinating, and perhaps a bit maddening. The more clearly you see through the illusions that govern human behavior, the more compassionate you become toward the people caught in them. This isn't what you'd expect, is it? Logic would suggest that seeing through someone's delusions would make you impatient with them, perhaps even contemptuous. But the opposite happens. When you truly understand that someone's anger is really fear, that their greed is really a desperate attempt to feel secure, that their cruelty is really a protection against their own vulnerability, well, how can you not feel tender toward them? It's rather like watching someone fight desperately against quicksand. The more they struggle, the deeper they sink. But they don't know this. From their perspective, struggling is the only sensible response. You can see that relaxing would actually save them, but they can't see it yet. So you're left with this extraordinary paradox. The clearer your vision becomes, the more you love what you see through. You begin to love people not despite their illusions, but because of their beautiful, innocent commitment to strategies that can't possibly work. And this creates its own form of suffering, doesn't it? Because now you're not just carrying the weight of your own expanded awareness. You're carrying a kind of cosmic empathy for everyone who hasn't yet seen what you've seen. I find myself moved to tears sometimes by the sheer earnestness with which people pursue happiness in all the wrong places. Not moved to judgment, but to a kind of overwhelming tenderness, like watching someone search frantically for their glasses while wearing them. The seeing doesn't separate you from humanity. It connects you to humanity's essential innocence. But oh, what a responsibility that connection becomes. And then there's this. Once you've really grasped the temporary nature of all things, you can never again experience anything without a subtle undercurrent of goodbye. Every beautiful moment carries within it the shadow of its own ending. Every face you love bears the trace of time's inevitable passage. Every joy is tinged with the knowledge that this too shall pass. Now, the Buddhist might say, ah, yes, this is dukkha, the fundamental suffering that comes from attachment to impermanent things. And they'd be quite right, as far as that goes. But there's something more subtle happening here, something that goes beyond traditional teachings about non-attachment. You see, this melancholy isn't really about attachment at all. It's about love. Pure, unconditional love for life itself, combined with the crystal clear awareness that everything you love is borrowed time. I watch the sun set and I'm overwhelmed by its beauty, but I can't help but see in that beauty the preview of every sunset I'll never see. I hold someone dear to me and feel such gratitude for their presence, while simultaneously aware that one day one of us will be holding a memory instead of a person. This isn't morbid thinking. It's the natural consequence of awakened perception. When you truly see the preciousness of something, you automatically see its fragility. They're not separate insights. They're two faces of the same recognition. And here's the strange beauty of it. This melancholy actually intensifies your appreciation rather than diminishing it. When you know something won't last forever, you taste it more fully while it's here. The temporary nature doesn't make it less meaningful. It makes it infinitely more precious. But still, there's that gentle sadness that colors everything. Like background music you can't quite turn off. The sadness of someone who loves too much and sees too clearly. But now, let me suggest something that might surprise you. What if this melancholy we've been exploring isn't actually a problem to be solved? What if it's not the unfortunate side effect of awareness, but its most precious gift? I've come to see this sadness as a form of spiritual maturity. It's what happens when your heart becomes large enough to hold the full spectrum of existence. Not just the pleasant parts, but the poignant ones as well. Think about it. A person who can only feel joy when circumstances align perfectly is actually quite limited, isn't they? But someone who can find beauty in impermanence, meaning in uncertainty, love in loss, now that's a consciousness that has learned to dance with reality as it actually is. This melancholy is your soul's way of saying, I am awake enough to love what I cannot keep, wise enough to cherish what I cannot control, mature enough to find meaning in what I cannot understand. I've noticed that the people who try hardest to avoid this sadness often end up living the most superficial lives. They become addicted to optimism, to positive thinking, to any philosophy that promises permanent happiness. But in avoiding the shadow, they never develop the depth that comes from embracing the full range of human experience. The gift hidden in this grief is integration. When you stop running from the sadness of seeing clearly, you discover that it's not separate from joy. It's what gives joy its poignancy. It's not the opposite of love. It's love's mature expression. There's something almost sacred about allowing yourself to feel the full weight of existence without trying to fix it, change it, or transcend it. To simply say, yes, this is what it's like to be a conscious being in a temporary universe, and I accept the whole magnificent, heartbreaking package. So, how do we live with this? How do we function in a world of beautiful illusions when we can see through them? How do we love people without trying to wake them up prematurely? How do we carry this melancholy without being crushed by it? I've learned that the secret is not to resolve the paradox, but to learn to dance with it. You see, the mistake most people make when they first taste expanded awareness is thinking they need to live consistently with what they've seen. They feel they must always act from their highest understanding, speak only truth, relate to others from their deepest wisdom. But this is just another form of spiritual perfectionism, isn't it? The real art is learning to move fluidly between different levels of awareness as the situation requires. To be able to engage seriously with someone's concerns about their career while simultaneously holding the cosmic perspective that makes careers seem rather quaint. To feel genuine enthusiasm for a friend's plans while knowing that plans rarely unfold as expected. It's like being a skilled actor who can become completely absorbed in their role while never forgetting they're in a play. The performance doesn't become less authentic because you remember it's a performance. If anything, it becomes more skillful. This requires a kind of emotional sophistication that most spiritual teachings don't address. It's not enough to see through the game. You have to learn to play it beautifully anyway. Not because you're fooled by it, but because playing is what conscious beings do. The melancholy becomes your companion rather than your burden. It's always there in the background, this gentle sadness that comes from seeing too much and loving too freely. But it no longer dominates the foreground of your experience. Instead, it adds depth and texture to everything else, like the minor key in a complex piece of music. Let me share with you something I've discovered about this peculiar melancholy. It can become a form of meditation itself. Rather than treating this sadness as something to overcome or transcend, what if we approached it as a doorway into deeper presence? What if we learned to inhabit it fully, the way we might settle into a comfortable chair or sink into warm water? There's something profoundly centering about accepting the weight of existence without trying to make it lighter. When you stop fighting the melancholy, when you stop treating it as evidence that something has gone wrong, it transforms into something quite extraordinary. I call it sacred sadness because it connects you directly to the heart of what it means to be alive. It's the emotional signature of a consciousness that has awakened to both the beauty and the brevity of existence. It's what love feels like when it's no longer naive. Sometimes I sit with this feeling deliberately, the way others might sit in meditation with their breath. I let myself feel the full poignancy of caring about temporary things, of loving mortal beings, of finding meaning in an ultimately meaningless universe. And something remarkable happens. The sadness doesn't increase, it deepens into something that can only be called reverence. You discover that this melancholy is actually a form of worship. It's your heart's way of honoring the profound mystery of existence. It's how consciousness pays its respects to the incredible fact that anything exists at all, let alone something as unlikely as love, beauty, and awareness itself. When approached this way, the sadness becomes nourishing rather than draining. It feeds some deep part of you that can only be satisfied by truth, even when that truth is bittersweet. You find yourself grateful for the capacity to feel this deeply, to care this much, to see this clearly. It's a strange kind of gratitude. Gratitude for being able to be broken open by beauty, for being sensitive enough to ache with empathy, for having a heart large enough to hold the whole tragic-comic spectacle of human existence. And so we come to the end of our journey together, though, of course, like all real endings, this is actually a beginning. Here's what I want to leave you with. This melancholy you feel, this tender sadness that comes from seeing too much and understanding too clearly. It's not a bug in the system of consciousness. It's a feature. You are not broken because you feel the weight of existence. You are not too sensitive because beauty makes you ache. You are not spiritually insufficient because awareness sometimes feels like a burden rather than a gift. What you are is awake. And awakeness, real awakeness, always includes the recognition of how much there is to lose, how fragile everything beautiful is, how temporary all arrangements are. But here's the secret that takes years to discover. On the other side of fully accepting this melancholy lies something unexpected. Not the absence of sadness, but a joy that doesn't depend on circumstances. Not immunity to pain, but a love that isn't diminished by loss. Not the end of caring, but a way of caring that doesn't demand guarantees. When you truly embrace the sorrow of seeing, when you stop trying to think your way out of it or meditate your way beyond it, when you let it live in you as naturally as breathing, something shifts. The sadness remains, but it's no longer in opposition to anything else. It becomes part of a larger harmony, like the bass note that gives depth to a beautiful chord. You find that you can be simultaneously heartbroken and whole, melancholy and magnificent, grieving and grateful. These aren't contradictions to be resolved, but complementary aspects of a consciousness mature enough to hold paradox. So let yourself feel it all. Let yourself be moved by temporary beauty. Let yourself love what you cannot keep. Let yourself grieve for the innocence you've outgrown. And know that in doing so, you're not failing at enlightenment. You're embodying its most human expression. You're becoming someone who can love this strange, impermanent, heartbreaking, magnificent existence exactly as it is. And perhaps in the end, that's the only kind of wisdom that really matters. The strange sadness that accompanies those who see too much is not a problem to be solved, but a sensitivity to be honored. It is the mark of a consciousness that has grown large enough to hold the full spectrum of existence, not just its joys, but its profound poignancy as well. This melancholy is your soul's recognition that you are awake enough to love what you cannot keep, wise enough to cherish what you cannot control, and mature enough to find meaning in what you cannot fully understand. Embrace it as sacred, for it is the price and the privilege of being truly alive.